Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about a ultimate guide to playing the commander role in Hell Let Loose. So I don't really like long intros, so we'll just get started. So first we're going to talk about how to start a game as commander. For me, it's pretty similar. It's kind of like, kind of like StarCraft. Every game I play, I start it basically the exact same play. And so if you're playing against me, you can probably use this to your advantage, because you'll know what I'm probably doing. First, I will spawn my own supply truck. I leave the default supply truck for whoever else might use it, because a lot of times engineers will jump in that one, or squad leaders will take it to build garrisons. But they're not going to know you're going to spawn a supply truck, and so they might just jump in the spawn as, like, I don't know, AT and jump in the transport truck when they would have spawned in as engineer to build nodes. So it's actually better to just kind of spawn your own truck, and then you want to spawn in the same column as or row as the midpoint, so that you can drive your supply truck to make the first garrison. I almost always in every single game make the garrison first. Whether you take the middle point or not is mostly dependent on who built the garrison the closest to the strong point and first. When you're starting the game, before the match actually starts, you can drop a supply drop. You'll want to drop a supply drop most of the time somewhere in the neutral zone that will be good for a flank garrison later. So it'll either be a defense garrison on your flank or an attack garrison on the flank, depending on whether you lose or capture the middle point. And you'll be using your truck to build the first garrison. You want to build the garrison as close as you can to the strong point. And it doesn't have to necessarily be in a perfect forever place. Think of your initial Gary as like a temporary garrison to just get people inside the strong point and taking mid cap. Because just think about how many games where you're fighting over the midpoint before it's even been taken and people are behind you. It's pretty much never happens. Everyone's fighting over the midpoint at the very beginning of the match. And so it doesn't really matter if your Gary is in a perfect spot. You just kind of want it somewhere where it's going to feed people in the fastest. Now, there's some exceptions to that. Some maps you just really don't want to put it out in the open, but in general, that's my advice. Next, you'll want to spawn a supply truck somewhere in the HQ, because that's about the time that the middle supply truck has been taken, and it's also about the time the supply truck has cooled down so that you can spawn another one. And that's just so someone else can make nodes or make garrisons. You pretty much just always want to have a supply truck in the HQ at all times. One of the most important things to do when starting a game is to make sure someone is making nodes and ask for someone to be making nodes. Point it out if it's not being done. You need to make sure you have people on artillery and that the tanks are being used. Artillery is so important that you can't just not be using it. It's like literally one of the sole deciding factors of the game. It's really overpowered, and a lot of people are complaining about that. You pretty much have to use artillery if you want to win the game. If no one's using artillery, prepare to lose. So when you're starting the game, you're driving a supply truck to make garrisons. So first, you want to make a garrison, of course, as close to the strong point as possible. But then you want to make a second garrison. Either decision here, you can either play aggressive or more defensively. In general, it's better to play more defensively because you just don't know what's going to happen. But if you're feeling ballsy, you can just continue driving into the enemy sector and try to get behind them and build a garrison in the red zone after you capture the middle sector. So you'll have a red zone garrison all the way behind them ready to go. So in general, though, it's better to just put the garrison somewhere like just 200 meters away from your initial garrison, but toward your defense point. When you run out of supplies, if your supply truck, you can drive it back to HQ and go to the ammo depot, which is like this little awning kind of thing. Drive underneath it, drive beside it. It doesn't matter. You just have to drive by it, and it will automatically refill your ammo. Refill your supplies. Then you can go back and drop your supplies again to make several garrisons and such. Okay, now I'm going to talk about how to read the map. So reading the map is not easy at first, but there's some things that you'll want to keep in mind. And there's lots of different icons of the map. And really my recommendation is to really not play Commander until you know what the icons mean. And you'll slowly learn this as you just play the game. but the ones you really need to worry about are the infantry marker and the tank marker, the garrison marker, as well as a light vehicle marker, and I guess even the outpost marker. And then there's observe and move marker, and you really gotta hover over each icon and see who is actually able to see that icon. It'll tell you. So if it says unit and nothing else, and that means only your squad can see that. You and your squad are only ones. So commander can't see it. Other squad leaders can't see it. There's only a few ones that are like that, and one of them is request supplies. So there's a request supplies icon, and then there's a call in supplies icon. The call in supply as icon is the one the commander can see and other squad leaders. But the request supplies, that's just what your squad can see. And I point that out because it gets annoying when people say like, oh, can you drop supplies on my marker? And they're using the request supplies icon. I can't see that. I can only see the call in supplies icon. I'm not going to go through each and every one because that's just really tedious. But in general, the commander markers can be seen by the entire team. And so it's just important for the commander to keep that in mind and to mark everything that they see, because you have such a humongous amount of power being the commander in that everyone can see your markers. And so everything you see and everything you're doing, you can get the entire team to focus on that. One of the things when you're analyzing the map is just kind of look at your friendly positions, see where they're looking. Where they're looking at is probably where the enemy is. Especially if you have multiple people looking in the same direction, that's where they're probably being shot at and they're shooting back. And so that means that the enemy is right in front of them somewhere, and you use your best judgment into terms how far away they are, but they're usually closer than you think. And so, that goes really into being a good artillery player, is understanding that concept, but it's also important for commander because it lets you know where to call in bombing runs and where to place markers. So sometimes I won't even know, I won't even have a recon plane over the map yet, but I will know where the entire enemy team is. And it's because I can just tell based on the cap weight in the sector and based on where my team is and their position and where they're looking at, and where the garrisons are lighting up and where the garrisons are not lighting up. So where garrisons are not lighting up, you don't even need to worry about those areas, because nothing's over there. Nothing's over there within 50 meters in any direction. If a garrison is hot, that means enemies are really close and they're probably about to destroy that garrison. And that same thing goes with outposts. So you have to keep all that in your mind whenever you're playing commander, because it helps you tell the team where the enemy is. If you are marking the wrong shit, then you're gonna screw over your team, because if you place a big infantry marker somewhere where there's only one guy there, then your whole team's potentially could be focused on that, and they're not focused on the main attack. So you really need to be marking where most of the enemy team is, unless there's just some particular person that's really important that needs to be killed because they're about to take out an important asset. That's also something to keep in mind. You have to read the maps with a grain of salt. They're not 100% accurate. Some maps are better than others. Some buildings are not exactly where the map says they are, and that's just something to always keep in mind, and you just have to learn that as you're playing the game. Okay, I'm going to talk about the basic game mechanics. These are things that you need to know, but Hell Let Loose will just never tell you. Don't think they're ever going to make a tutorial. I've given up on that hope, but it's whatever. So here's the basic game mechanics that I could think of. Of course, I'm going to inevitably miss some things, but because there's just so many things. But here's a rundown. One of the most important ones is that garrisons can be built 200 meters apart. The game will kind of tell you that in game, but it's a good thing to know. Garrisons in the red zone will lock if an enemy is within 100 meters of it. So red zone garrisons, garrisons that you make in the enemy's zone, you don't need to defend it. You don't need to worry about it. If it goes red, just forget it, because there's no way you could possibly know where the enemy is. He's somewhere within 100 meters in any direction, and so it would be a huge waste of time trying to defend that, unless you know they know where it is and they're coming to destroy it specifically, and then you would wait by that garrison for them to come to it. But most of the time they're just walking by and have no idea that Gary is even there, and so it'll eventually go back to being available to be spawned on. If a blue zone garrison goes red, that means an enemy is right on top of the garrison and they are actively destroying it. It depends on if they're in the back sector or if they're not. So if the garrison is like essentially in your current defense zone, then that garrison can be destroyed almost instantly, like within a few seconds. It's not worth doing anything for it. Assume it's already destroyed and make a plan for making another, or tell squad leaders that are standing by that garrison about that garrison and they can probably save it. There's nothing you can do about it unless you're standing right beside it. For garrisons that are in the back line, now the back line is pretty much defined as this, not your first defense sector, but the defense sector behind that one. That's where garrisons take a long time to be taken out. I think it's like 30 seconds. Those are ones you can call a strafing run on. But you need to keep in the back of your mind, is it worth the strafing run to save this garrison that they're probably going to come back and destroy anyway? A lot of times for me, the answer is no, but sometimes I'm losing like my current sector and they're starting to take out the garrison in the back line. And that's when I really use that strafing run, because it's really important that that garrison stay up. A lot of times you'll see a blue zone garrison light up red, but not lock. And that just means an enemy is within like 50 meters. So that's just, it kind of is like a little radar that you can always keep in mind. But it also is an indication that the garrison is probably about to be destroyed, and so it needs to be defended. Outposts can be destroyed by explosives such as grenades, tank shells, but they can't be destroyed by artillery or bombing runs or precision strikes or anything like that. But they can also, outposts can also just be destroyed by just walking into them. Garrisons can be destroyed by tank shells, satchels, bombing runs, and precision strikes, but they cannot be destroyed by grenades. You have to dismantle the garrison if you're infantry. I mean, you could shoot with a bazooka if you have a bazooka. And yeah, I mean, it's just kind of hard to keep all this stuff in mind, but they do this stuff for a reason, for like balancing and everything. But the big issue is they just don't tell you. You just have to figure it out. Another thing is that supplies on the ground, you can use it if you're a squad leader, engineer, or commander, if you are within 50 meters of that supplies. And of course, it has to be from your faction. Another really important thing that a lot of people do not realize is that garrisons in the blue zone cost 50 supplies to make, and garrisons in the red zone cost 100 supplies to make. If you're losing the last sector of the map, you won't be able to spawn in the HQ there. So the HQ on like the map when you're spawning in has like little garrison markers, but there's no garrison there. It's just a natural HQ spawn, and it will stay there until there's cap weight on that last sector. And this is just one thing I'm going to mention just because I'm just really annoyed seeing people not know this, and it's that tanks in general need to be shot in the back with bazookas and rockets in order to do damage. There are some exceptions where like a Panzerschreck can pin tanks from the side, even from the front for like mediums or light tanks. There's some tidbits to it, but in general, if you're wanting to do damage and you're wanting to do the maximum amount of damage to a tank, you need to shoot it in the back. The supply truck can only drop supplies after you drive 2 sectors out. Now there's some exceptions to that, and I guess I'll point them out, but you don't really need to worry about them. But if you're not playing on warfare and you're playing on offensive mode, then you can drop it in the defense HQ if it's not in the last sector, like if it's not your last point, and you can drop supplies on attack before any points have been taken in the HQ. Most situations, you can only drop supplies after you drive 2 sectors out, which is outside of your HQ zone. Now, I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention it again, and it's because it's just really important, and a lot of people don't understand this, is that garrisons cannot be destroyed by grenades. They can only be destroyed by... They can't be destroyed by artillery either. They can only be destroyed by satchels, tank shells, bombing runs, and precision strikes, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. And also bazookas and a Panzerschreck. Outposts are the spawn points placed by the squad leader, and they can be destroyed by any explosive, including grenades, but they can't be destroyed by artillery or bombing runs. And of course, outposts can be destroyed by just running into the outpost, and garrisons have to be destroyed specifically by running up to the garrison and holding down F or holding down X or whatever it is for console. It'll tell you in the game. If you're inside a strong point, it increases your cap weight times 3. And it doesn't matter what role you're playing, doesn't matter if you're commander or squad leader. Everyone is times 1 if they're inside the sector, which is any sector that's touching the strong point, essentially. But it's really like the 4 sectors that are within a certain section that are in the strong that are inside the sector. And so whenever you get in the strong point, you are times 3. Trucks can be destroyed by explosives, but they can also be destroyed by MGs. So Browning, MG42, MG34, Soviet DP27, all these things, Lewis gun, whatever it may be, they can all destroy trucks. PPSHs, Thompsons, MG submachine guns, they can't destroy trucks. It's just those light machine guns that can do that, or even heavy machine guns if they get added later, I imagine. The tank's machine gun can destroy vehicles too. It's basically the same. It acts the same as the machine guns. In order to make a garrison, you need 50 supplies when you're in the blue zone. You need 100 supplies if you are in the red zone. So another thing it's important for the commander to know is how nodes work. Essentially, you just look at your map and you see if you have 60 per minute in each resource. And if you have 60 per minute in each resource, then that means you're at full nodes. If you don't have 60 per minute in each resource, then that means you need a node for that resource. And so in order for someone to make nodes, there has to be 3 separate engineers, can't be the same person. Each person needs to build a set of nodes. And that needs to be done pretty much as soon as possible, so that's why it's important to spawn spare supply trucks at the beginning of the game and throughout the game so that those engineers have those supply trucks ready to go. If you play Commander long enough, you'll realize sometimes the UI for like the map doesn't work really well. And so you'll like click supply drop and then try to drop it somewhere, but it just won't respond. Well, what you have to end up doing is just kind of going back and clicking it again until it works, and clicking the map and just kind of playing around with it until it finally starts working. And that's been around ever since the game has come out, and it can get really annoying, especially when you're trying to do something really fast. Okay, so there are 3 different types of resources in this game, and they're munitions, manpower, and fuel. And so now I'm just going to talk about each resource. For munitions, you have the ammo drop, supply drop, recon plane, precision strike, strafing run, and the bombing run, or the Katyusha strike, depending on if you're playing the Soviets. So I'll just talk about each one. For the ammo drop, I would just recommend never using it unless you have a abundance of munitions that it just doesn't matter, then why not? But other than that, it's just kind of a waste of 100 supplies. I hardly ever see it being used, and it's usually destroyed by the enemy. Some people say to use a supply drop to fool people into thinking it's like an airhead or something like that, but I think it's just a humongous waste of supplies, because like if you're watching any of my videos at any time and just look at how much munitions or other supplies I have at any given time, I'm almost always low, and it's because I'm utilizing all of the munitions and all of the supplies to the best of my ability all the time. And if I'm doing that, I'm never gonna have that much, especially if I'm playing like the Soviets. The supply drop is where you just drop 100 supplies anywhere on the map. From the basic mechanics of the game, the supplies can be utilized if that person is within 50 meters of the supplies. And to be clear about that, the enemy can't use your supplies and you can't use enemy supplies, but you can use any supplies, whether you're an engineer or a commander or squad leader, if you're within 50 meters of it. Because the supply drop can drop 100 supplies, the best use of a supply drop in the game as of right now, and has been for the past couple of years, is to drop the supply drop somewhere in the red zone so that you can make a garrison with that supply drop. A lot of times people will see that they have like, I don't know, a friendly squad or a recon team that's in the red zone. And then people will be like, okay, well, I'm going to drop this supply drop on that squad because I want them to make a Gary there. But you don't want to drop a supply drop right on top of their outpost. If you did that, you pretty much just killed the entire squad, because every enemy within 100 meters potentially is going to be rushing the squad now, and they're probably going to get wiped out. So if you're dropping supplies, you need to make sure it's not anywhere near the outposts unless you have no other option. Now the same thing goes for, you don't want to drop supplies right on top of garrisons. You don't want to drop supplies right on top of airheads. That's the same thing. A lot of people will drop supplies right on top of an airhead, but the thing is, the airhead, the whole point of the airhead, and the only way it'll possibly work, is if the enemy doesn't know it's there or they can't get to it. And so the airhead drops before the supply drop. So that means the supply drop will drop after the airhead. Now, you could try to drop the supply drop first, and then after the supply drop has been sort of halfway, you can maybe try to get them to both drop at the same time, but that's kind of very difficult to do. But I wouldn't recommend doing that either, just because if it doesn't work, it's very expensive to lose the supplies and the airhead. So what I recommend for the airhead and supply drops is not to drop them together, but drop them in different locations. So if I'm dropping an airhead, I don't know, to the west of the enemy point, I'm probably going to drop the supply drop to the east, because it will confuse some new players. Some of them will go to the supply drop. If one of those lands, the supply drop survives, it can become a garrison at some point, and if the airhead survives, of course, people can spawn on it. But the big thing is, if you drop the supplies right on top of the airhead, it increases the chance that the airhead's not going to be successful, because it gives the enemy more time to find the airhead. Another thing I wanted to mention about the supply drop is that you need to drop backup supplies. So let's say you have a garrison on your point, but there's no supplies on your point. Sometimes I'll drop supplies on my point, so I'll have backup supplies ready to go should my garrison be sniped by a tank or killed or destroyed by someone. And then I can just build another garrison immediately instead of having to wait for the supply drop. Of course, you risk the supply drop being destroyed by artillery or bombing runs, but it's better to have some reserve supplies on the point ready to go. Just try to put it somewhere where it will be less likely to be destroyed by explosives. If the enemy team is paying attention to your supply drops, then you can try to play that to your advantage. So like, let's say you just built a garrison to attack the enemy point, then you can drop a supply drop just opposite of where you just built that garrison, so that the enemy team will rush to that supply drop. And in the event they don't go to your supply drop, then you can make a garrison with that supply drop. So it's kind of a win-win situation either way. And so I'll do that all the time. If I drive a truck to go build a garrison, then I will drop a supply drop opposite of the enemy point. So that'll get some of the players off of the point for the main attack. It's important to learn what the drops look like. Ammo crates versus supply drops versus airheads. Airheads look like a little box. Supply crates kind of look like a little box, but it's a green box if it's allies, and if it's British or German, then it's a torpedo looking drop for supplies. The ammo crate basically looks like a big flat crate. People don't usually drop it. And then the airhead is like a tiny little brown box that's dropping from the sky with a red parachute. Now, it's not the only one that has a red parachute. German supply drops have red parachutes. Okay, so now we'll talk about the Recon Plane. The Recon Plane just kind of flies over the enemy and gives one little snapshot of the enemy. It's as if someone just flew over the enemy and took a picture where they were at that time. So wherever the dot is, it's most likely the enemy is no longer there. So whenever you're looking at the Recon Plane, you got to think, where is the enemy now? Like, where would I be in 5 seconds after I was running across this field? Well, they're probably running to a trench or just some cover. So you need to keep that in mind whenever you're looking at the Recon Plane. Another big cause of confusion with the Recon Plane is that you will get a hollow diamond as well as a filled-in red diamond. The hollow diamond indicates a truck, jeep, or a half-track, and it's usually a truck. The filled in diamond indicates a tank. So if you were to see a hollow diamond in the red zone after a recon plane flew over and a bunch of infantry over there, that means there's either a truck drove over there and made a garrison, or there's a half-track there that you need to destroy. But that also goes into just trying to find and locate garrisons on the map. The more experience you get, you can actually kind of tell just by doing a recon plane. So the enemy team will almost always run pretty much directly from their garrison toward you. That's just how most people play this game. And so whenever a recon plane goes over and you see like a trail, and it always kind of makes a kind of a triangular shape where the tip of the triangle, the top tip of the triangle, is where the garrison is, and then everyone else is somewhere between the two extremes. And so you just kind of circle all the way back, and you can kind of guesstimate based on your map knowledge of where the garrison might be. Now, if you play this game enough times, you know that people make garrisons in certain places all the time, and they almost never put it in other places. And so that gives you a pretty good idea of where the garrison is. And that's how people can seemingly know where all of your garrisons are. Sometimes you're playing a game because you got people like me playing against you, and we just kind of know where they're at because we've been playing this game a long time. Another big part about the recon plane is that you don't always need to call it in. You only need to call in the recon plane if you think it's going to tell you something that you don't know. So, for example, there's no point in dropping a recon plane just over the enemy point unless you're like trying to locate the garrison for like a bombing run, or you're trying to locate a good place for the bombing run, or you just need to know if there's a tank or something like that. But you don't just drop a recon plane to drop it. You need to have like something in your mind, like what's something I don't know that I want to know that the recon plane can maybe tell me, and that's when you use your recon plane. Okay, next we'll talk about the precision strike. The precision strike is pretty expensive. It's $250, but the thing that's really expensive about it is time. It has a cooldown of 20 minutes. So you can only call this in very rarely. So I pretty much never call it in, and that's just because there might come a time where you need that precision strike and you need it like immediately. And if you just kind of waste it on something not important, then you don't have it for 10 minutes. But every now and then you'll have like a stationary tank that's just absolutely wrecking everyone and no one can get to it, and then you can call a precision strike on it. And that's really what the precision strike is intended for. It's intended for taking out tanks, especially heavy tanks. So the best use of precision strike is to take out a stationary heavy tank. Everything else should be taken with a grain of salt. Is it worth it to take out that medium tank? You know, it's kind of up to you. Do you have a heavy tank that's nearby that can kill it easily? Then no. Do you not have any tanks nearby and that tank is wrecking the entire team? Yes. Same thing goes with light tanks, but light tanks, those can be easily killed by infantry. So is it worth it to use a precision strike on that recon tank? Probably not. Any good AT player that can get reasonably close could easily kill it, but you know, it's a case-by-case basis. Of course, if that light tank moves at all, then you're just gonna miss because it can move really fast. Whereas the heavy tank, it takes it a minute to get going, and so it'll hear that precision strike coming, and it'll try to move, but it probably won't get very far. Whereas the recon tank can just zip away real quick, but it won't expect you to precision strike it because a lot of people will just assume that would be a waste. You also have to keep in mind the cost differential is 250 munitions worth 100 fuel. Is it worth 600 fuel? You know, or is it worth 200 fuel? You got to keep that in mind. You don't want to basically be losing more than the enemy team by calling in a precision strike. Now, this may not matter if you have a lot of munitions, but it does matter whenever you don't have a lot of munitions. And just a disclaimer about the precision strike, it has pretty much a 50-50 chance of working, even if you perfectly hit the target. And it almost never will actually destroy a garrison, but it can destroy a garrison. But it usually misses because it doesn't really, it's not very precise for a precision strike. It just lands somewhere within the circle of the precision strike, and you can change the angle of attack of your plane by moving little arrow on the precision strike and have the plane come from that direction. Now that most of the time doesn't matter, but it matters on maps that have buildings You don't want them to approach where the missile is going to hit the building. So you have to keep that in mind too. And one last thing about the precision strike, it is different based on what faction you're in. The United States will drop 2 500-pound bombs. The Germans will drop 1 1,000-pound bomb. The Soviets will use like a rocket strafe, and the British is similar to the Americans. Well, I'd say out of my experience, all the precision strikes are okay. It's just the German one is really bad because basically, unless the 1,000-pound bomb is a direct hit, it really doesn't do much, which is kind of disappointing. It should have more of an area of effect damage and really just obliterate anything that's even close to it. Okay, now we will talk about when to use a strafing run. A strafing run is your ability to use a quick attack on the map. So there's only a few situations where you need to do this. Most of the time you don't want to use it. You definitely don't want to use it all the time because it'll drain your munitions really quickly, and it will not really it's not really worth the cost to do that. So the only time you really want to use a strafing run is if you are clearing one of your garrisons that might be in the blue zone. Every now and then you'll have someone, like one of your garrisons in the blue zone will turn red, and that means like an enemy is taking it down. And the only time you'd want to put a strafing run on that is if they are taking it down and you are in the back line, or you are playing on offensive and you are on offense. So frontline garrisons on offensive mode by the offensive team take a long time to take down, just like garrisons all the way in the back. Like if you were to have a garrison not in your defense sector, but the sector behind your defense sector, it would be a long takedown garrison. And those are the ones that you can use a strafing run on. But you also have to keep in mind, is it worth it to strafing run this person? Because if it's a recon team and it's in the backline, odds are they're just going to respawn and come back and destroy it. And so it's not really worth it. Sometimes it's better just to let them take it down and go build one somewhere else where they are less likely to expect it. Another time to use a strafing run is during a cap race. Now this is like a cap race that's really close, not just any cap race. So if there's like a really close cap race, or even that you're just really close to capturing the enemy point, and you're able to, and you see where the enemy is, or you have a good idea of where the enemy is, and you know you're not going to kill any friendlies, then you can call in a strafing run where you think the enemies are, to maybe kill 1 or 2 people in the strong point, in the enemy strong point, to try to help you in the cap race. Now the same goes on defense. If they're taking your point, you just kind of see where your team is, and then you see where there is nothing, and the place where there's nothing there and you're losing your point, that's likely, like in your strong point, is likely where the enemy is clustered. And so a strafing run can be pretty devastating in that situation because they're trying to cap, so they all like to run into the strong point and cluster up, and so you can use a strafing run to kill them all. It's a very case-by-case basis, and it really takes some experience to know when to use it properly, but when you do see the time to use it, it's like a time is of the essence. You got to use it quickly and use it now and not wait too long, because if you wait too long, it will not be worth using anymore. And of course you can use strafing runs all the time if you have the munitions to support it. I wouldn't use strafing runs like that unless I had like at least 700 excess munitions. So next I'll talk about bombing runs. So the way a bombing run works in this game is that it essentially drops a bomb, and then just diagonal to where it dropped a bomb, it'll drop another bomb, and diagonal to that one, it'll drop another bomb, and it just keeps doing that. And so it's kind of like a more powerful artillery barrage, except for unlike artillery, bombing runs can destroy garrisons. That essentially makes the bombing run very important for destroying garrisons. It's the one thing other than tanks that you can use, and a precision strike, though that's very inaccurate, that you can use to destroy a garrison that you can see but you can't get to. My recommendation is to almost exclusively use bombing runs to destroy garrisons. Now there's exceptions to that, of course, like if you're on defense and you're losing defense really bad, and you see that you have enough time to call in a bombing run to maybe turn the scales, then yeah, do that. But if defense is already lost and you call a bombing run in, it's a huge waste of supplies, huge waste of time. Now you don't have a bombing run to take the point back whenever you get your guys ready to go. And you may have even lost a lot of nodes, and so it'll put you in a rudder for a long time. So definitely avoid doing that. I see that happen a lot. I see your point being capped, especially when it's being like capped by like one squad, and they'll put a bombing run over it, and then that squad will capture the point, and then they'll leave the point, and the bombing run will kill nobody. So don't do that. Make sure you're using these bombing runs smart. Don't just call them in willy-nilly. Try to have an idea in your mind of what you want done with the bombing run, and then call it in. Also, when you're calling in the bombing run, try to ensure that every part of the bombing run is in a useful area. Now, sometimes there's nothing you can really do about it, but just take a little bit, a couple more seconds to just make sure it's in a place where it's going to be utilized to its maximum efficiency. If you destroy their garrison, they're not going to survive very long on the point because they're constantly being shot and killed by everybody else in the team. Now, there's a bit of a different way, at least I think, when you're playing the Soviets. So the Soviets have the Katyusha rocket strike, which is very different from the bombing run. One, it's completely inaccurate. Two, it has a shorter cooldown time. And three, it covers a wider area. So the rocket strike, it really isn't that good, but it can be used to its maximum efficiency if you call it in as often as you can. Because with the Katyusha strike, you can't be smart about it with like a bombing run. Bombing runs are more precise, and you got to be really deliberate on what part you're going to hit. Whereas the Katyusha rocket strike is going to hit everything you want to hit and everything you don't want to hit, and even hit some of your friendlies sometimes. And it's just like kind of chaos. And so the best way to really use it, from my experience, is to call it in as much as you can on the enemy point. Just constantly rain hell on them. Try to reserve all your supplies, all your munitions, so that you can always call in the Katyusha strike every 5 minutes. Of course, don't call it in if your team is capturing the point and it's not needed. Otherwise, you want to be calling it in almost constantly over where you think the enemy garrisons might be. And another thing to keep in mind is that when those rockets are falling on the enemy, like, I don't know if y'all have ever been under a Katyusha rocket strike, but you just know that at any given moment you could be killed by a rocket. And so what do most people do? They run inside. So what you'll want to do is use that time to really kind of push the enemy, kind of Soviet style, get your team to move up toward the end of the rocket strike, so that when the enemy team is still thinking rockets are falling, you could be right on top of them and get their garrisons. You can, of course, try to run through the Katyusha rocket strike. I'd say you have about a 50-50 chance of making it. But if you're in a trench or something like that, you have a much higher chance of being fine. So, but then you can run and take out enemy spawns and everything. Also, a big part about this game is like you can't just be using all of your abilities at all times. You have to kind of adjust to based on how much nodes you have. So if you have like hardly any nodes or no nodes, you don't really need to be calling in supply drops. You need to be saving all of your munitions for the bombing run or the Katyusha strike. Now, there's some exceptions to that, of course. Like if no one's dropping supplies and you desperately need a garrison, then you have no choice. But in general, that's how it is, and you want to encourage your team to make nodes so you can actually use all of your abilities. But you will have to prioritize what abilities are more important whenever you're low on munitions or low on any resource. Okay, next I'm going to go over Manpower. I have actually made an entire video going in depth on Manpower, and that's because of the nuances with the Airhead. Now, I'm not going to go through all of those again in this video, but I'm just going to talk about things in general. But what Airheads do in general, for anyone that's completely new to this, is that they're basically like a garrison, and you can drop it anywhere on the map. It doesn't matter where. It could be deep in enemy territory or anywhere. Well, actually, I guess it can't be dropped for 3 or more sectors deep in enemy territory, but you definitely wouldn't want to do that anyway because it would be useless most of the time. There's a number of ways to use the airhead. You can either drop the airhead directly on the enemy, flank the enemy, drop the airhead as defense. Like, there's so many different ways you can use an airhead. It literally would take an entire video to explain it all, and I've already done it. So I'm going to actually leave a link in my description and in the comments section of this video so that you guys can watch that if you're wanting to learn about airheads. So another thing about the airheads is that they're very fragile. While garrisons cannot be destroyed by grenades, airheads can be destroyed by grenades or any other explosive, and so you have to be really careful with the airhead because if it's within grenade range of the enemy, they will probably get it. You just need to keep that in mind. I will point out one thing about airheads because I do this all the time, and it's that if I'm dropping an airhead and it's in enemy territory and I think that there might be enemies there, I'll always call in a strafing run whenever the airhead is 3/4 of the way down, and that way the strafing run goes over the airhead as soon as it lands. So if anyone's waiting on it, they'll get killed. Okay, so next I'll talk about when to use Dismantle. So Dismantle Garrison in general doesn't really need to be used very often. So why does it even a move in the first place? Well, the thing is, the way the garrisons work in this game is that if a squad leader builds a garrison, then only the squad leader that built that garrison is allowed to destroy that garrison. The only person on the team that can destroy any garrison and all garrisons is the commander. Now, the commander can do this either by using Dismantle Garrison ability or by running up to the garrison. And this is to prevent, of course, any griefers that can join the game, join a squad leader and just go around and dismantling all the garrisons. So with that in mind, you'll find like other tutorials on YouTube and such, and people will say like, well, you never want to use this because you can just spawn in and, you know, just destroy the garrison yourself. But sometimes you're kind of important and you're in an important position and you don't need to be in the spawn screen, and it's just not a really good idea. And that's when you're using the Dismantle Garrison. So, and especially if you have plenty of manpower, you can use it, but you also need to use it. Like, it's better to use that manpower to get a important garrison down now than to wait, spawn in, and destroy a garrison and then have them put it up. Of course, that's going to be based on your judgment when it comes down to it, but in general, that's kind of what I have seen. Another thing about the Dismantle Garrison is it can be used kind of in a strategic way. So, like, let's say, you know, you can only make garrisons within 200 meters of each other. So if I'm 150 meters, I can't build a garrison there. I'd have to walk 50 meters away. But if I have Dismantle Garrison, I can get in position with supplies to build a garrison in a better location and dismantle garrison and then build a area there. I mean, you can try to coordinate with a squad leader to do that. In my experience, it's not a really good idea. You just never really know if the squad leader is going to be very good at doing that. And so it's really good for you yourself to get in position and just get ready to do it all in one go. So for Reinforce, you really do not want to use Reinforce too often. You really only want to use Reinforce when you absolutely need to. The way Reinforce works is that it will double the cap strength of any friendlies you have inside your defense circle. So it doesn't work on attack or anything. It only works on your defense point. So, and it's not going to work if you only got friendlies in the sector. They have to be inside strong point, inside the black circle. So if there's no one in the black circle, don't call in a Reinforce. It's a waste of your manpower. Really, the trick with Reinforce is just knowing when you shouldn't call it in. I mean, it's really easy to call it in and it's really not too expensive, but it does add up. You want to know when the point is lost and that you are better off saving your manpower because you don't really want to be wasteful for no reason. So the only time I ever really use Reinforce is if the point is 50% capped and I have a decent amount of people inside the hard cap and the race is really close, or the race is just so important, like if I lose the point, I lose the game because there's not enough time left, then I'll just throw a Reinforce anyway, just because, you got nothing to lose. One of the bigger takeaways for Reinforce is that you'll have a lot of people in the game, like, demanding you do a Reinforce, but, you kind of put in mind with what I just said, and it's ultimately your decision. So whether you think you need to call in a Reinforce or not, call it in. Don't
call it in because someone asked. Then there's also encourage. There's not much to say about encourage. It'll just double the production of your nodes. So your nodes are usually 10 per minute, but if you use encourage, they'll each be 20 per minute. And if you use encourage every 10 minutes, you'll almost always just have plenty of supplies and everything, unless you're just really wasteful. But it really only works well if you have full nodes. If you don't have full nodes, it doesn't really benefit you that much. So you don't want to be using encourage if you only have one node set. You don't want to use encourage if you only have 2 node sets, but you can in that situation and it'll still be worth it, but it's just not worth it to do it if you only have 1 node set unless you're just really desperate for certain supplies. But the hardest thing about encourage is just remembering to click it every 10 minutes, and you can even convert other resources to encourage to get that encourage up. It's worth it to do that if you need to do it, and just don't forget to do it because it is just really, really important for the team. Okay, so next I'll talk about fuel. The Halftrack is very expensive for what it is. It's 300 fuel, which, you know, is more than a medium tank to spawn in essentially what is a moving garrison, but it's actually kind of worse than a garrison because a garrison maximum timer is 40 seconds, whereas a Halftrack maximum timer is 60 seconds. And so it doesn't spawn people as frequently. The Halftrack is very fragile. It's just as weak as a truck, but it's immune to bullets. So like a machine gun can destroy a truck, but it can't destroy a Halftrack. But other than that, the Halftrack can be destroyed by artillery, by rockets, by tanks, by mines, by precision strikes, by a satchel, like anything explosive essentially can destroy the Halftrack. And so it's just really a poor investment. Now, the only reason that you'd want to use a Halftrack is if you essentially you have max garrisons and you can't build anymore and you need another Gary somewhere on defense way in the back. That's probably the best use of a Halftrack, because the recon team can't destroy the Halftrack. They could just sit there and be angry at it. And so that's really the best use of it. Now, if you're lucky enough to get a Halftrack deep behind enemy lines without being spotted, it can really come in clutch, but it's just very unlikely that you're going to survive the journey. And if you do, someone's probably going to lock it out, because everyone, when they see a Halftrack, everyone's just kind of rushing over there to get it because they know of how the consequences if they don't. So in general, I recommend just never using a Halftrack unless you have more than enough heavy tanks ready to go. So that usually in my mind, that's like if I have 2 tank crews and heavy tanks and I have 1 heavy tank ready to go and I have plenty of fuel otherwise, I'll call in a Halftrack. Now, this is like a case-by-case kind of thing. Now, there are some times that you'll want to call in a Halftrack, and it may not be the best time in terms of your fuel cost. When you're losing the last sector of the map, then you can no longer spawn in that sector. And so what happens then is you can spawn a Halftrack in that sector so that you can have a spawn there. If you're having to spawn in a Halftrack for that reason, though, the game's probably over. But sometimes the Halftrack can save you. But a lot of teams are starting to expect that you spawn the Halftrack, and they'll just wait for it to spawn and farm it. But that's something to keep in mind. When it comes to spawning trucks and Jeeps, you pretty much never want to spawn the Jeep or the transport truck. They're very, very rare instances where you'd want to do that. The only time I spawn a transport truck is if the entire team is spawning in the middle point and the transport truck is full. And so, and then a lot of people keep spawning in the middle for some reason, which, you should always keep in mind, or looking at the map and seeing where to spawn, because if the truck's full, you don't want to spawn in middle. But sometimes a lot of people spawn there anyway, and then I'll spawn them a truck. But even then, they usually just walk because they don't notice the truck, even when I tell them in the chat that it's there. So, I mean, you can spawn it for that situation if you think it might be best, but really in general, I think it's best just never to spawn it. For the supply truck, you essentially want a supply truck in spawn at all times somewhere, preferably wherever you think it's less likely to be hit, or where you think the best area for the team to make nodes would be.
This also is dependent on what game mode you're in. So if you're playing on offensive mode and you're on defense, then you want to spawn the supply truck in the sector that is not your defense sector, because the supply truck can then drop supplies in the HQ where the truck is. And that's the only time that the truck can do that, other than whenever you're on offensive and you're attacking, and before the first sector is capped, you can drop supplies in the first red sector before it gets capped. But it usually, a lot of maps, it'll get capped before you can even spawn the supply truck. So it doesn't really work for every situation. I almost never spawn a Jeep, but if I do spawn a Jeep, it's because a recon team has specifically requested it because they want to go take out artillery. And sometimes I'll just spawn a Jeep if someone just asks for it, because I usually have plenty of fuel and it only costs 80 fuel, and I don't really have any problems with it. But usually they just get killed or something, and it's whatever. It's a game, you know. Sometimes you just spawn things because they're fun for people to use. But if you're, you know, of course, just trying to be efficient, trying to win, then the only real need of a Jeep is to get recon to the enemy artillery as fast as possible. So in general, as a commander, you don't actually want to be driving around in a Jeep, although that's technically what a commander would have done, you know, back in World War II. No, you'll want to be driving a supply truck most of the time, because you can use that to make garrisons.
So in general, when you have excess fuel, you'll want to spawn a heavy tank in an HQ where you think it's not likely to be destroyed by a satchel or an enemy tank or something. I put it like off in like one of the bottom sectors, or if you think it's going to go out pretty soon, then you can put it where it would be more useful, closer to the action. But it's just good to have a heavy tank sitting in your HQ if your team is using tanks. But even if not, it's good to just use your fuel for that. I wouldn't really spawn medium tanks unless your team specifically asks for it, or if you need a tank to go out right now and you got a tank crew that's waiting.
So on the topic of fuel, a lot of times you'll be in a team where no one wants to be in a tank, and you know, it's kind of unfortunate because that can really decide your match if you have tanks or not. But basically, you know, to keep an eye on your fuel, and I even make this mistake too because it's just hard to remember, but you got to constantly convert that excess fuel to everything else, and it really helps out in the long term. So like if you're over 1,000 fuel, that just means you're not doing convert enough. That's the only thing that means. It also means you're not using enough tanks, but what it really means is you're just not converting. And so you really got to keep your conversion up if you're getting over 1,000 fuel. Okay, next I'm going to give a little talk about just how to be a leader and how to lead your team. First of all, just don't be shy. Don't be shy to do commander. Don't be afraid to do commander. You got to have a little bit of a thick skin, because there are going to be every now and then just, you know, the way that being on social media, being online, being in a game online, especially where it's like, you know, you're killing each other, people are just going to say things that are mean, and you just have to be like, I don't give a fuck, and just move on. It's very rare that happens, because we do have a pretty, at least in my experience, a really good community where everyone's very supportive of each other and is polite. And a lot of people, especially if you talk to everyone and you say like, hey guys, I'm new, can you, I want to play commander. I watched a YouTube video about it, and you know, if you have any advice for me, just let me know. You know, people will be really willing and happy to have you as the commander. So, but you got to communicate. You definitely don't want to be commander if you don't want to talk. I mean, heck, I kind of sometimes don't want to talk, but I'll play commander anyway. And I'll talk to people, but you know, I understand not wanting to talk. But you know, if you don't want to talk, it's probably best to not play commander. But one of the really important things about being commander is that you are leading the team, whether you like it or not. It's just kind of the whole dynamic of the game. It doesn't matter if like there's a squad leader that's level 400 telling people what to do. You're the commander, so whenever you say something, people are gonna say like, hey, the commander's saying this. The commander you may be like level 50 and or level 20, and you know, people are just going to take you more seriously just because you are currently in the commander role. Now if you start doing a really bad job, people will start to revolt and mutiny, but in general, people are going to listen to the commander over everyone else. But so important things to keep in mind is to just be, well, calm, stay calm and collected. Things can get pretty stressful sometimes when you're playing commander, especially when everyone's barking orders at you and demanding things from you. But just kind of stay calm. Keep in mind it's just a game. Every now and then you'll have conflict going on in the chat or in the or something going on in the game, and you can be the leader and step in and say, "Hey guys, we're done. Let's drop it. Let's move on." And if you say that when you're in the commander role, people tend to listen. It's really crazy. I've never been in a game like this where people actually respect the leadership position, but this game people really do respect the leadership position. So you need to keep that in mind. As the commander, you never want to escalate any conflict. If you are the one that is being a jerk, and even if someone said something really mean to you, you don't want to escalate conflict. You don't want to be the person that's making things on the server even worse in the chat and everything. And people, there's 50 other, there's 10 other people or so listening to you when you're talking. So, everyone is keeping in their mind, oh, wow, I can't believe that guy said that about the commander. He's such a jerk, but they're not going to say anything. And so, but if you sit there and just kind of, brush off bad comments, people notice and they will respect you for it. But if you throw a tantrum, people are going to think differently about that. So it's things to keep in mind. So just be polite to everyone always, even if they're being jerks. Have thick skin, keep a positive attitude. And really what I mean by that is there's a lot of times where the game seems like all is lost and it's hopeless. And really your game isn't really over until the commander says it's over. So, and because there's a big morale factor in this kind of game. And so if the commander keeps the spirits up, then the team will keep the spirits up. And so if you encourage people and say, guys, hey, we can still win this, we can still do this, people will listen and they won't give up. But if you say, hey guys, it's over, might as well just give up and log off, then people will listen to that and they will do that. So, but I've seen games even when you're down to the last sector and they're capping the last sector and they almost have the last sector. I've seen games like that turn around where you're doing that you turn it completely around and you're doing that to the other team and you take their last sector, even though you're in that situation. So just always keep the spirits up and encourage people to keep going. Another big thing is to thank people for doing things, especially things that you ask them to do. Thank people for making nodes. Thank people for making garrisons. People like to be told thank you. Then the last piece of advice is to keep in mind that you can talk to the entire team with the text chat. A lot of commanders just kind of ignore the text chat. So even if they're being asked something in the chat, they'll not see it because they're not reading it or paying attention to it. But if you're on PC, the text chat is how you talk to the whole team, and you as the commander, your text is highlighted so everyone sees it essentially, unless they've turned it off, which you can do in options, by the way, but you probably shouldn't. As the commander, just point out things that are very important to the team, like there's a garrison at my mark, there's a tank at my mark, I need someone to make nodes right now, we need more garrisons, I need more people to play squad leader that are going to make garrisons. Just things that are really important. Now, you definitely don't want to overdo it, because if you type too much in the chat, people are just going to zone it out and ignore you. So you really got to be careful to say things that are important. Next, I'm going to talk about how to win games. So when I'm playing commander, I will almost always win. Not always though, because it's a team game, and I can make mistakes too. But it's very rare that I'm going against a commander that's equal in skill to me, I guess I should say. But it does happen sometimes. There's a pretty good stepwise way in where you can win pretty much every game if you are able to do this. But the most important thing in this game is making garrisons, and you'll hear that a lot, but it's really, really important, and you really have to think about like why it's so important. The garrisons are your constant flow of reinforcements. I know it's just a 50v50 game, but think of it as if it's not a 50-50 game. Think of it as if it is a real life situation, and you have people constantly dying and people constantly coming into the fight. And so garrisons are where your reinforcements are coming in, and they're coming in from that direction. And whenever you don't have a garrison, then you're not having reinforcements. If you don't have reinforcements and the enemy has reinforcements, eventually they're going to outnumber you and take you out. And that's the same thing goes here. I mean, it's 50v50, but eventually in a cap race or when you're defending, if you only have one Gary and then it's taken out, and then the enemy team is attacking with 20 people and you have 30 people, well, then all of a sudden you have 15 people, and then you only have 5 people left, and then they have 15 people left, and then they have 10 more coming in because they have a garrison nearby, and then you lose your point because you don't have a garrison. So I've been playing this game a really, really, really long time, and I know that if you are defending a point and it's under attack and the garrison is destroyed, that point is seconds away or minutes away from being taken by the enemy. And that's because that's just how the game works. You need that constant reinforcements coming in. And so it's incredibly important that you have a garrison network set up. And so you need garrisons on the front line supporting the main attack. You need garrisons behind the garrisons on the front line supporting the garrisons that are supporting the main attack. And you need a garrison, of course, on defense. And then in certain situations, you may not have enough garrisons to do this, but you need a garrison behind the garrison on defense so that that garrison has support too. Now, I don't usually use that last garrison because I'm put more attacking garrisons up and more flanking garrisons up. But you got to think of it. Garrisons are your constant reinforcements, and you need to make as many of those as you can in key locations. You don't want to put them in useless locations because you only can make 8 of them, but you need to make as many as you can. Another thing is, like with Commander isn't the sole person responsible for making garrisons. It is a team effort, but it is the commander's primary responsibility to ensure garrisons are made. So if there's not garrisons made, you're telling people to make garrisons, you're dropping supplies for them to make garrisons, you're driving a truck for you or them to make garrisons, you're telling them in chat that we need more support players to make garrisons. It's your responsibility because you have chosen to lead the team. And so a big part of leading the team is just telling people things that we need, things that they're not paying attention to because they're shooting at somebody and someone's shooting at them. They're not paying attention to the fact that they need a garrison because they're not looking at the map. They're not aware of that. They're being shot at. They're shooting back. They have no idea what's going on. You're looking at the map, so you got to tell them what's going on and what is needed. Key point into winning games is just anytime someone marks something important, you copy that mark. So if they mark a garrison and it's accurate or it's there or it's close to there, mark it too, so our team knows it's there. If there is an enemy tank, mark it too. It's not redundant for the commander to mark the team because the squad leaders, whenever they mark something, only their squad can see that mark. No one else on the team other than the other squad leaders and the commander can see it. You need to copy those marks because there might be a really, really good AT player in a squad with a squad leader that's not talking to anyone or making any marks. And so you're marking that for that one badass guy that's going to go over there and kill that tank. It's hard to remember to do that because, there's a lot of things you have to remember as playing Commander, but that's just one of those things. It's just really important to copy those important marks. Another thing that's an important mark is making artillery markers. The Commander artillery marker is seen by the entire team. The squad leader artillery marker is seen by other squad leaders and the commander. I don't know why it's like that. It doesn't make any damn sense, but that's how the game has been as long as I've been playing it, to my knowledge. And so the commander is the only person that can mark where to drop artillery so that non-squad leaders can see it. Now, there's a lot of people that do artillery that are not squad leaders, and people don't like it because it makes more sense to do squad leader, true, but A lot of people do it because they need to level up a class, and that's just kind of how it is, and it makes sense, you know? Like, people that are level 10 squad leader don't need to be on artillery squad leader because they're not unlocking the class that they're trying to unlock. So for those people, you got to give a marker for them, because otherwise they're just kind of guessing. You can also just mark an infantry marker, and they'll probably get the memo. Now, there's also the factor of counterattacks. So there's a lot of times where it just feels like the whole enemy team is attacking your point, like all of them, and it's just overwhelming. And that is actually a good time to attack their point. Now, I'm not saying send everyone, but send a squad, send someone to their point. And I mean, by sending them there, I don't mean telling them to walk there. I mean you either placing an airhead or placing a garrison near the point and then having people spawn on it. And if you're starting to see cap pressure on their point immediately, that's a kind of an indication that you can start sending more. And whenever you're capping their point and they're not capping your point, that's a time to go all in, because especially if they have a Gary right by their point, because they're not going to be able to do anything about that because they don't have anyone defending. On offensive mode, it has a little bit of different mechanics than warfare. And so whenever you're attacking on offensive mode, all of your garrisons that you make on attack, like in your sector, are a long takedown, like they're in the back line on warfare. Well, I guess first I should explain that there are two game modes. There's warfare and offensive mode. Offensive mode is when one team is trying to take the entire map and the other team is trying to defend at least one of those sectors for 30 minutes. And then warfare, of course, is just trying to conquer most of the map within an hour and 30 minutes. And if they capture the entire map, then the game ends. On defense, the server has made like default garrisons for you to spawn on. And they are different than other garrisons. You can spawn on them every 10 seconds. And the real big important thing about these spawns is that they can't be destroyed by explosives. No, they can't be destroyed by grenades, artillery, just like any other garrison, but they also can't be destroyed by satchels and bombing runs and all of that, and tank shells. They're just immune to all of that. And so they can get really OP, especially for certain sectors like pumping station, where on Carrington, where the garrison is within, like, the point is within walls. So it's almost impossible to take that point because that garrison is constantly spawning in more people every 10 seconds, and it can't be destroyed by explosives. So if you're attacking a garrison like this, it's good to memorize where those things are on each map. Another thing you can do is either have a recon team or even just a really sneaky good player sneak behind the enemy and take it out. It can be taken out very fast, like a normal garrison, or have a tank drive up by it and lock it out, because that garrison that you spawn on in that situation is not a real garrison. It's just a spawn point. It doesn't count toward your max cap of 8 garrisons, and you can build another garrison right beside it. You shouldn't put it right beside it, but you should put it somewhere close where it wouldn't be destroyed if someone walked up to it, and lock both garrisons. So they have to be further apart enough so that they can't both be destroyed at the same time by the same person. You want them to be pretty close to each other. It basically gives you 2 spawn points inside of sectors, so that if one is destroyed, you have the other. And it makes it really hard for the enemy team to take the point, unless your team is just really bad. And so that's something to always keep in the back of your mind. It takes 2 minutes to capture a point in warfare. So if you're attacking a point and it's starting to cap in your way, it's going to take 2 minutes. It doesn't matter how many people are attacking. It's not like Battlefield. It doesn't speed up based on how many people are there. It takes 2 minutes to cap. And in warfare mode, you can start capping a point if you're anywhere within the sector. You don't have to be in the strong point. You can be in any part of the sector. It's just you are ×3 in the strong point. So you'll increase your cap strength in the strong point. However, for offensive mode, you have to be in the strong point or you will do no cap weight on the sector. but you are not defending in offensive mode unless you are inside the strong point. That doesn't mean that everyone needs to be in the strong point. You got to have some kind of map control, but it does mean that there needs to be some people in the strong point constantly, because I've seen a lot of games in offensive mode where the team has a really good defense setup, but like a recon team or someone sneaks into the strong point and no one's there and the enemy takes the point. And the reason that they can really even do that is because on offensive mode, it just takes 1 minute to capture a point. There's a thing about offensive mode that I wanted to bring up, and it's that on defense, it is your responsibility to ensure that backup garrisons are being made. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to make them yourself, but it is your responsibility to coordinate and ensure that they are being made. But it is expected that you make those garrisons with a supply truck, and if you don't, your team's going to be pretty mad at you because they won't have anywhere to fall back on once they lose their point. When you are offensive on offensive mode, it is your responsibility as commander to ensure that the old garrisons from, whenever you capture sectors, the old garrisons are being destroyed. You can only make 8 garrisons, and same is true on offensive mode. So if you have a bunch of garrisons in the first sector, then you won't be able to build any garrisons in the next sector. So you have to make sure you go and destroy those. Just jump in a Jeep or a truck and drive around and destroy those old garrisons. If you are playing the game as commander and you have over 1,000 supplies in something, then that means you're not using your supplies enough. It doesn't really matter what the situation is. That's almost always the case. It just means you're not using enough of your stuff, because you shouldn't have over 1,000 at any given time. So if you have over 1,000 something, pay more attention and start to use that resource in a positive way. Don't just waste it, of course, but you need to try to use it. If you're playing on PC, you can press T to toggle your HUD. This turns on your HUD on and off. And if there's a button on it for console, you should figure out what that is. That's really important. Every now and then you'll be like trying to shoot something or do something, and you'll just see a bunch of little icons right in front of you, and they're just really annoying. And you can press T and they'll go away. And sometimes you want to see where all the icons on the map are, and you can press T and they'll light up. So if you look in the bottom left corner when you're talking, you can see who is talking and what squad they're in. Just keep that in mind, especially when you're like playing squad leader or commander. You want to know who's talking to you, and you can't memorize everyone's name, so you just call everyone Dog or Charlie or whatever. And so just see that if they'll be talking, they'll have like a D next to their name. That's Dog Squad talking to you. If you're trying to talk to a specific squad leader and they're not listening, or talk to a specific person and they're not listening to you, you can hover over them on the map and see what their name is. You can also hit tab and bring it up, but that's like a pain in the ass, so I wouldn't recommend doing that. Okay, now I'm just going to do a rundown of where you should be placing garrisons in general. Now, people, of course, have different opinions on this one, and I'm sure people will let me know what those opinions are, but here are my opinions. Someone has been playing this game for almost 3,000 hours. Almost all that time has been commander. Your garrisons in the strong point are the most effective garrisons for defense. You'll have different people have different ideas, and they'll say like, well, never put a garrison in the strong point because it can be shot by a tank or hit by a bomb and run. And that's true, but a lot of the games I play in are full of new players and they don't know what's going on, and so they'll spawn in and they'll pretty much hang around wherever the garrison happens to be. It doesn't really matter if it's on the point or not, and so they won't run to the strong point. On another side of that is that it's just better to have the team spawn directly in the strong point than for them to have to run to the strong point. I've seen plenty of times where the garrison is off point and the enemy team is in the point or very near the point, and we can't reinforce it fast enough because the garrison's not close enough to a strong point. That doesn't mean that it's the only garrison you have, though. Ideally, you have more garrisons supporting that garrison. You want to be kind of a bit unpredictable with your garrison placements and place them often and frequently, and encourage your team to do so as well, because a lot of experienced players play this game like myself, and we just kind of know where the garrisons are. It may seem really creepy and weird that we're just going to every spot you have a garrison and destroying it, but it's really not that hard to figure out when you've been playing this game for so long, because garrisons will only be 200 meters apart. So if you found one, you found the other, and you found the other, and you find the other. So of course there are stream sniping that goes on sometimes, but the vast majority of the time it's just you're going against some really good players and they really know what they're doing. If you know you're going against a team with inexperienced players, though, you don't need to worry about being unpredictable for your garrisons, because the enemy team's not going to know where to look for them. So you can build them in the standard good spots in that situation. But if you're playing against a really good team, like a really good experienced team, you really got to be unpredictable and build the garrisons in less expected locations. Try to keep a constant network of garrisons supporting a garrison. If you see one garrison on defense, that should make you really worried, because that means you don't have a strong defense and you're probably going to lose your point pretty quickly. The fact is, most of the time when you're playing Commander, you're not going to be following my advice. You're just going to be playing the mid game, and the mid game is pretty much from start to finish. The mid game is unpredictable and anything can happen, and that's what makes this game really fun, because you just really never know what's going to happen. But you don't want to micromanage your team. You have to kind of accept that in the end, the team that you're playing with is going to do what they want. But especially when it comes to things like defending, in my experience, it's better to just ask for volunteers for defense, because the thing is, defense is really important and you really need good players to do it. And so it's better to have a volunteer do that than someone you told to do it, because a volunteer is more likely to stay there and actually defend, whereas someone that you told to defend, they might just ignore you. You can tell them to defend and see if they acknowledge it, and that's different. In general, I ask for volunteers, and it just kind of makes things better. As your commander, you need to point out other important updates to the team while you're playing the mid game. It's the commander's responsibility to ensure things are noticed. Like, for example, if your point is being captured, once you learn how what airheads and bombing runs sound like, you can warn the team of those things too. You always want to point these things out. Never assume that your team heard or saw the airhead / bombing run or whatever it may be. Odds are they didn't. Sometimes you need a squad leader to do something specific, but they won't do it. But if sometimes it's something that someone in their squad could do, and you could say, hey, like in the chat, say, hey, so-and-so in G squad, go do this thing, or someone in G squad drop supplies at your OP or something like that. And you'll be surprised, a lot of people do listen to that. As commander, you can take responsibility for directing the flow of the game. If you need more people attacking, you can say, hey, I need more spawns on attack. If you need more people defending, you say, I need more spawns on defense. And I don't really recommend telling people to mass redeploy for defense in most situations. Most situations, it's better to not have them mass redeploy. It's better to just say, like, hey, everyone that dies needs to spawn on defense, or everyone that dies needs to spawn on attack. But there's a lot of people playing this game that don't know anything, and so it's really good to tell them these things that seem obvious, but you got to tell them when to defend and when to attack. You can also tailor your commanding based on what kind of lobby you're in. If you're in a lobby with lots of new players, and new players I would say are people that are level 50 and below for the most part. For new players in general, they like to be micromanaged more, and by that I mean, like, they like being given specific directions, because they may not be exactly sure what to do. If you give them specific orders, they really enjoy that, and they will think you're a really good commander for it. But if someone is level like 300 or 200 or 150, they don't really need to be micromanaged. They know how to play the game. They know what to do in general, and they don't really like being given specific orders unless it's something that they just didn't know. Like, hey, there's a garrison right beside you, do you mind destroying it? Or there's a tank right beside you, mind destroying it? You don't need to micromanage the more experienced players, and they'll probably get annoyed with you and mute you if you do it too much. So in general, for new player lobbies, you can be more micromanagey, but if it's a more experienced player lobby, you really just need to be there more of a guide than a micromanager. And throughout the mid game, you need to almost constantly be dropping supply drops where you want garrisons in the future, where you want garrisons now, and where you want garrisons later, and just have supplies ready to go already. That doesn't mean you need to go build a garrison at these locations, but you just have those supplies there. And here's just some last other tips of things that people just get confused on, because it just kind of makes sense because this game doesn't explain anything. So airheads, garrisons, outposts, even other tanks, all these things cannot be destroyed by friendly explosives. So you can put a bombing run right over your own airhead, and it will not destroy the airhead. You can put a bombing run right over your own garrison. It won't destroy the garrison. I see a lot of people playing the game, like getting mad at artillery if the munitions are low. But when munitions are low, unless you have 3 artillery guns that are constantly shooting, it's most likely not artillery that's causing the low munitions. It's the commander not using their munitions well. It's a commander not using encourage. It's a team not making nodes. That's something important to keep in mind when you're playing the game. Also, I'll add that artillery is the most cost-effective way to use munitions, especially by someone that knows how to use artillery, because it's only costs 3 munitions to basically drop a bomb right on top of the enemy. It's really, really important. It's more important than your bombing runs or your strafing runs or your supply drops for artillery to be constantly shooting. So if you have artillery shooting and you're telling them to stop because munitions are low, you need to have a really good, compelling reason for that, because most of the time you're wrong and the artillery should keep shooting. If you get low on munitions and artillery cannot shoot anymore, it might be a good idea to convert something like either manpower or fuel over to munitions so that artillery can keep firing. A FYI, you could do everything perfectly, be the perfect commander and do everything right and still lose, because this is a team game, and sometimes the enemy team is just better than your team and you're going to lose, and that there's nothing you can do about it. Sometimes you just need to be proud that you didn't get 5-0'd, which is when the enemy takes the entire map. Sometimes you just have to be proud that you held the line. If any of you have played Commander before or played it enough times, played games where like, hey, if I wasn't playing Commander, this team would have been steamrolled in the first 10 minutes. But since I was playing, we actually lasted the whole game or lasted an hour or whatever. So you just got to take those small victories, even though you lose the game, and just keep in mind that you're the commander, but you're just one cog in a machine that needs to work together. Okay, that is everything I wanted to say for this video. If you want to learn more about Commander, I encourage you to just watch my other videos, and they don't have to necessarily be tutorial videos. Just watching me play Commander and seeing what I'm doing is a way to learn as well. And of course, the best way to learn is just to play Commander and kind of do a trial by fire. If you understand the basics of the game and you were wanting to try Commander, then I would just go ahead and jump on it and try to do it at some point. Don't be afraid or anything, and people have pretty low expectations for the most part, but if you exceed those expectations, they'll be pleasantly surprised. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and if you watched the entire video, I am very surprised that you had the attention span to do that. If you want to see more Commander content for Hell Let Loose, consider subscribing, because that is what I will be doing almost exclusively.